I am a strong advocate of school choice because I think education is the foundation for individual success and happiness and for the quality of life in our community. I'm not going to really talk about the research tonight because we've got people that have done research, but I want to try to create some context and talk about what's necessary for human well-being. There's only one real natural resource, that is the human mind. 300 years ago, oil was useless to people. Oil is useless today to a bear. Somebody invented oil. 30 years ago, telecommunications went through big, thick cables made out of copper, which was expensive and rare. Today, telecommunications goes through fiber optics made out of sand or through the air. Somebody invented fiber optics. Radical transformation in telecommunications impacting all of our lives created by human minds. So human minds are the only natural resource. The three pillars that make human minds productive: knowledge, which largely comes from education, incentives, and capital. And I'll talk about them kind of in inverse order. Capital is the machines, the tools we use to magnify our productivity. If I have a bulldozer, and I know how to use it, and it's in good working order, and you have a shovel, and we have to move 100 tons of dirt a quarter of a mile, I'm going to win, right? Because I got a bulldozer. Machines magnify human productivity. What's interesting about bulldozers and machines, technology, is one, they are invented by human minds. Somebody invented a bulldozer. And secondly, human beings have to make choices to enable that kind of activity to take place. Somebody has to choose to save. Somebody has to choose not to eat all the corn, to have some seed corn. Because developing a bulldozer takes years and lots of savings to make that happen. Somebody has to accumulate the capital. Somebody has to make that choice. Those nasty capitalists provide the money that makes bulldozers work. But they can only do that in conjunction with entrepreneurs and inventors that provide the intellectual capacity to create the bulldozer. So capital makes human minds productive. Secondly, and under-discussed, I think, is the role of incentives. In order to be productive, you've got to want to be productive. And to do that, you have different kinds of incentives. Some can be psychological. A lot of you are here not because you're going to get money from doing this, because you believe you have a passion in this issue. On the other hand, economic incentives do make a lot of difference. In fact, one, I think, agreed-on issue in economics across the political spectrum is that incentives work. Incentives work. And in relation to that, it's almost unanimously proved, although there would be arguments about it, that certain kinds of incentives are very destructive. The incentives that underlie socialism and communism, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, is a very destructive incentive. It incents people to be needy. The incentive that underlies free societies, from each according to his productivity, to each according to how much he produces, actually is a very positive incentive. It encourages people to be productive. In addition, it provides them the capital from which to grow their business. And that's how incentives and capital relate. If you look at Microsoft, or if you look at Apple Computer, they started with a very little bit of capital, grew it enormously, because they had a choice. They made an incentive to save that money and reinvest in technology that's improved all of our lives. So incentives impact human behavior. There is a big incentive, however, a meta-incentive, and that is freedom. It's liberty. Liberty is essential for human physical well-being in the sense that in order to be productive, in order to be innovative, you have to be able to think for yourself. If somebody makes you act like 2 plus 2 is 5, you literally cannot think. And government rules and regulations force people to act like 2 plus 2 is 5 and literally destroy the thinking process. And if you reflect on it, all human progress, by definition, is based on innovation. It's based on creativity. Because unless somebody does something better, which by definition will be different, there can be no progress. Innovation and creativity is only possible to an independent thinker, somebody that thinks for themselves. Entrepreneurs are essential to human well-being. We've got a lot of entrepreneurs in this room. Entrepreneurs take the ideas of scientists and engineers and turn them into reality. Without entrepreneurship, there's literally no progress. And what defines entrepreneurs? They're independent thinkers. They think differently. They think out of the box. They explore. They fail. They try again. They are experimenters. And they can only experiment if they are free to pursue their truths. If they can experiment in a way that makes sense to them, as liberty is essential for that experimentation process. A year ago, Cato published a book that came from Cato, Bob mentioned, called Poverty and Progress. It looked at human well-being from time immemorial. From the evolution of man 200,000 years ago to the late 1700s, human life expectancy basically remained the same. We had a little bit better quality of life, but life expectancy was the same. And then something happened in the late 1700s that transformed the quality of life and life expectancy, first in Western civilization, now throughout the rest of the world. It was an invention in the late 1700s, far more important than the wheel, far more important than the fire. It was the invention of the rule of law, of individual rights, of free markets, of capitalism. And capitalism transformed the quality of life on the planet because it created the only political, economic environment in which people are able to experiment, to innovate, to be creative, to learn and grow. So capitalism is the foundation for a radical improvement in the quality of life, and it was invented by human minds. In addition to capital and incentives, the ultimate foundation for human productivity is knowledge. And knowledge in the broadest context, which comes from education in the broadest context. Unless you know how to do something, you cannot be productive. If I gave you a bulldozer and you didn't know how to drive it, or if you didn't know how to maintain it over the long term, it actually wouldn't be very useful to you. It would just be a big lump of steel, right? You have to know how to do something. Now, knowledge has always been important to human well-being, but the role of knowledge has been increasing very rapidly. It wasn't but one or two generations of growth where you could learn a certain set of technical skills and have almost a lifelong career in those skills. Today, the pace of change in knowledge has gone off the chart. And there's only one kind of knowledge that really matters in that kind of environment, and that is your ability to think critically, to evaluate, analyze facts, to make decisions based on changing information using some fundamental understandings. Unfortunately, if you look at our government-run school system and you ask how good a job it's done teaching students to think critically, it gets an F. And it gets an F- in terms of the impact on lower-income students, on minority students in many cases, in terms of teaching them the fundamental skill of being able to think critically, which is necessary in the kind of world we're in today. Cato publishes a study that looks at the amount of money we've spent on education adjusted for inflation and the outcome. And we've had an exponential increase in educational expenditures, and we haven't moved the outcome at all. If you think about any other business that had that kind of outcome, it would long ago be out of business. It would long ago perished. Why have we not had the kind of innovation and creativity in education we had in almost other, well, basically in every other sphere of our lives? Well, it's very simple. You know, in business, we like to talk about being innovative, but we actually hate to be innovators. It's hard to be innovative. It'd be nice if we could just get a model and we could just run it every day, right? Any of you guys in business. But the reason we're innovative is because if we don't innovate, we get to go out of business. The world changes and we get to go out of business. In fact, if you run your business poorly, you fail. What happens in government-run school systems? If you run your schools really badly, what's the punishment? You get more resources. It's a great plan. Washington, D.C. is an incredible example of that. When Washington, D.C. spends more per pupil than any school system in America and has the worst outcome in America. Not a great, and the worse it gets, the more money they spend. Not how it works in markets. And it's not that they're bad people, it's the design of the system. It's a government-run monopoly, oligopoly, that cannot innovate and cannot change and cannot learn. If we were to really privatize education, what we would have is not necessarily just the private schools we have today, but I think we'd have some radical change. I think that there's some Sam Waltons out there, there's some Bill Gates, there's some Steve Jobs who would radically improve education. And the big beneficiaries would be low-income children. And we wouldn't have one monolithic system. We'd have a Walmart, and we'd have an Neiman Marcus. We would have lots of change. The possibilities are enormous in how much we can improve the quality of our lives and the lives of all the students in this country and literally in the world. You know, for a long time, I was a big advocate of government schools when I was younger, and I spent a lot of time trying to improve them. Now, the truth was, after about 90 days, I knew they couldn't be improved. But I kept working on them for 15 years. You know? And I asked myself when I finally woke up, why did I do that? It's an interesting thing to think about. I cannot remember, I read this story recently, and I can't remember who told the story, but it had to do with bread. If you look at bread, in the last 50 years, the quality of bread has improved radically. The options have improved radically, and the cost has fallen dramatically. The percentage of money you spend on bread has fallen dramatically. All done by market economies. If 100 years ago the government had taken over all the bakeries, I'll tell you, we'd have a lot poorer bread, but everybody would say, well, how in the world could we not have the government run the bakeries, right? And I think that's exactly why we have government-run schools. If people can't visualize how much radically better it would be if we had the kind of competitive, innovative forces that defines markets, if we had the experimentation and the incentives and the capital that attracts the Bill Gates and the Sam Waltons and the Steve Jobs to this industry. Now, onto the concrete question of whether more variety, school choice, improves economic growth. I'll give you a personal example. I moved from Wilson to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, when BB&T moved its headquarters, and I had 3 children in school, 2 of which were in private schools and 1 was in a public school. When my wife made that decision on where we were going to live, which wives do in those kind of situations, she drew a circle around where the schools were that fit that model, the private school and the public school. And we chose a house in that circle. We weren't going to live anywhere else in Winston-Salem, and it trumped all the other considerations. And of course, that area is done very, very well. It's a good place to invest in because there were options there, choices there. And choice is really about freedom, right? See, freedom is kind of an end in itself. And a funny thing happens when people get to make their own choices. When they get to choose their school, they're much more likely to make it successful. I think one of the geniuses of private schools is people choosing to go there. If you have to go to a school, you know, your enthusiasm, your incentive is a lot less than it would be. So I believe the privatization, in my view, of education is it's almost a moral crusade for the good of our children and the quality of lives, because better competition, better innovation leads to a better world, and I think that's very important work. Thank you very much.